When Rome burned, one man smiled, not from cruelty, from calculation. Marcus Crassus stood at the edge of the flames, watching a neighborhood collapse into embers. Around him, panic, screaming, desperation. He saw something different. Undervalued assets. The firelight danced across marble facades, smoke curled through narrow streets, and somewhere in that chaos, a property owner was about to sell at the worst possible moment. Crassus specialized in worst possible moments. He built the greatest fortune Rome had ever seen, not through war or inheritance, but through a simple understanding. Every crisis creates a transaction, and in Rome, crisis was a renewable resource. This is the story of capitalism's first monster, a man who turned disaster into empire and learned too late that some fires consume even those who profit from them. First-century Rome was an economy built on two pillars, conquest and credit, and both were collapsing. The Republic had expanded too fast. Wars drained the treasury. Political purges destabilized property rights. Fire destroyed entire districts monthly. It was a perfect storm, and perfect storms produce perfect opportunities. Marcus Licinius Crassus was born into wealth, then lost everything. His father and brother were executed during the civil wars, their estates seized, their name poisoned. At 26, Crassus fled Rome with 3 slaves and a sack of gold. He returned 5 years later as one of the richest men alive. What happened in between wasn't magic, it was pattern recognition. Crassus understood that Rome's chaos wasn't random, it was systematic, predictable, and therefore profitable. He saw an economy where property rights were negotiable, where disasters happened on schedule, and where desperation created motivated sellers every single day. Others mourned the Republic's decline. Crassus built a portfolio on it. When Sulla took control of Rome in 82 BC, he published lists. Names of enemies, thousands of them, senators, landowners, anyone who opposed him. Their punishment was death. Their properties, immediate auction. Most Romans stayed away. The blood was too fresh, the moral stain too obvious. Crassus attended every sale. He bought estates where the previous owner had been murdered days before, villas still marked with confiscation notices, land abandoned by families fleeing for their lives. Where others saw moral hazard, he saw distressed assets. He paid in cash, moved decisively, never wavered. Within 3 years, he owned more real estate than anyone in Rome. But ownership was only the beginning. Crassus built a workforce of 500 specialized slaves, not laborers, craftsmen, architects, engineers, tile layers, painters. He could buy a ruined property at dawn and have it renovated by dusk. The formula was elegant. Acquire during crisis, improve during calm, and sell during recovery. He flipped properties like a machine, each transaction funding the next, each profit reinvested immediately. The smell of fresh plaster, the sound of hammers on stone, the sight of wealth compounding in real time. Crassus didn't just rebuild Rome's properties, he rebuilt his fortune on the rubble of others. But real estate was seasonal, unpredictable. Fire, however, was constant. Rome's greatest vulnerability became Crassus's greatest asset. The city burned nearly every week. Wooden apartment blocks, insulae, stacked 6 stories high, narrow streets, open flames for cooking and heat. No fire codes, no public response. A catastrophe waiting to repeat itself endlessly.
Crassus saw the pattern and built infrastructure around it. He assembled a private fire brigade, 600 trained slaves, equipment, organization, speed. But they didn't respond to fires, they responded to negotiations. When a building caught fire, Crassus would arrive. Not his brigade, just him, and a contract. He'd make an offer to the owner, immediate purchase, far below value. The owner would see the flames spreading, smell the smoke, hear the neighbors fleeing, and they'd sign. Only then would Crassus signal his men. It was a monopoly on crisis response, a toll booth placed directly in the path of disaster. Legal, systematic, devastatingly effective. He didn't create the fires. He didn't need to. Rome created them for him, reliably, predictably. He simply positioned himself between the problem and the solution, and charged for access. Block by block, crisis by crisis, he accumulated an empire. But Crassus understood something most entrepreneurs miss. Wealth without power is fragile. So he bought leverage over the powerful. He financed Caesar when Caesar was bankrupt, funded Pompey's military campaigns, loaned to senators, governors, magistrates. His terms were generous, his memory eternal. The first triumvirate, the informal alliance between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, was not a friendship. It was a balance sheet. Two generals held military power, one banker held their debts. By his 50s, Crassus was worth 200 million sesterces, 2% of Rome's entire GDP. He wasn't just rich, he was systemic. Too essential to collapse, too powerful to challenge. Or so he believed. Caesar conquered Gaul, Pompey commanded legions, Crassus counted coins. And it ate at him. Money bought him influence, but only military glory bought immortality. At 60 years old, Crassus launched an invasion of Parthia, an empire to the east, wealthy, unconquered, ripe for triumph. He was warned. The terrain was hostile. The Parthians were master cavalry. Rome had no strategic interest there. Crassus didn't listen. He wanted what money couldn't buy: eternal legacy. He marched east with 40,000 men, 7 legions, the largest Roman force ever sent into Asia. The Battle of Carrhae was a slaughter. Parthian horse archers surrounded the Romans in open desert. Arrows fell without end. The legions couldn't advance, couldn't retreat, couldn't escape. 20,000 Romans died. 10,000 were captured. The eagle standards, Rome's sacred symbols, were taken as trophies. Crassus attempted to negotiate. The Parthians invited him to a peace conference. It was a trap. He was killed, and legend says they poured molten gold down his throat. A fitting end. Gold poured into the mouth that craved it most. The richest man in Rome died in the sand, thousands of miles from his empire, chasing glory his fortune couldn't purchase. His body was never recovered, his wealth redistributed, his name a cautionary tale. Marcus Crassus mastered the art of profiting from fire. He understood that wealth accumulates fastest in chaos, that every disaster creates asymmetric opportunity, that capital, deployed decisively during a crisis, compounds exponentially. These truths remain. In every market crash, there's a Crassus buying distressed assets. In every disaster, someone positioning between problem and solution. In every collapse, capital reallocating from the desperate to the prepared. The mechanics haven't changed, only the instruments. But Crassus also teaches the other lesson, the one written in molten gold. Wealth without purpose becomes hunger without end. Ambition without satisfaction is a fire that consumes its owner. He accumulated more than he could spend, controlled more than he could govern, achieved more than he could enjoy. And still, he needed more. The question history asks isn't whether opportunity exists in chaos. It does. Always has, always will. The question is, when you're standing in the firelight, calculating the value of someone else's ruin, what are you becoming, and how do you know when to stop? Crassus never answered, and the answer killed him. Subscribe to Empire Minds for more stories where ambition meets consequence and history reveals the patterns we're still living. These aren't lessons from the past. They're warnings for the present.